Bride's former teacher stops wedding at the last second, but her reason made everyone cry. The banquet hall of the Langham Hotel, one of Chicago's most prestigious establishments, was impeccably decorated for the charity group wedding. 6. Couples from different backgrounds and with different stories would share this unique moment, including Richard Carter, a textile industry executive who never imagined his life would change completely when the fragile but determined voice of Miss Eleanor interrupted the judge at the crucial moment of the ceremony. "I object to this wedding," declared the 68-year-old woman, rising with difficulty from the third row supported by her carved wooden cane, a gift Richard had given her a few years ago. The silence that followed was deafening. 6 brides, 6 grooms, best men, bridesmaids, and more than 200 guests turned simultaneously toward the small, frail figure, who was now slowly walking down the center aisle. Miss Eleanor had been Richard's English teacher during his adolescence, and after his parents' sudden departure abroad, became his unofficial guardian, caring for him like the son she never had. Patricia Vanderton, Richard's bride, a 29-year-old business administrator, dropped her bouquet of white lilies. Her face, previously radiant, now expressed a mixture of confusion and horror. She knew Miss Eleanor, had visited her home several times, and always believed the older woman fully supported their union. "Eleanor, what does this mean?" asked Richard, visibly shaken, stepping down from the altar to meet the woman who had practically raised him. "Forgive me, my son," she answered, her voice choked but firm. "I couldn't let you make the same mistake. That destroyed my life, not when I know you're getting married for the wrong reasons." Holy Name Cathedral, where the group weddings organized by the city of Chicago traditionally took place, had never witnessed such a tense moment. Judge Paul Graham cleared his throat uncomfortably while the other 5 couples exchanged nervous glances. This charity event, widely publicized in the local media, was now taking an unexpected turn. "Ma'am, this is neither the time nor the appropriate place to," the judge began. But Eleanor interrupted him with a surprisingly authoritative gesture for someone of her fragile appearance. "I have little time left, Judge Paul. What I have to say cannot wait." There was a collective murmur. Richard's expression crumbled. He didn't know about this diagnosis. Eleanor had never mentioned being ill. The 32-year-old executive felt his legs weaken. "What are you saying, Eleanor?" he asked, holding the woman's hands between his own. 3 months at most, according to the doctors," she replied, with the tranquility of someone who had made peace with her fate. "And that's precisely why I cannot remain silent when I see you about to live a lie. A marriage based on a business arrangement, not love." Patricia, who had approached, stepped back as if she'd received a slap. Her father, Alfred Vanderton, owner of one of the largest construction companies in the country, stood up indignantly. "What nonsense is this? Richard, control this woman." But Richard remained motionless, staring fixedly at Eleanor. How did she know? No one knew the terms of the agreement between him and Patricia's father, a marriage that would save the Carter family textile business from bankruptcy in exchange for a generous investment from the Vandertons. It was at this moment that Eleanor took a small device from her purse, a blue flash drive with a turtle keychain. "Madalena, your cousin Edith's 5-year-old daughter, accidentally switched my flash drive containing school assignments with this one during Sunday lunch. When I opened it to check the contents and return it, I found something you need to see. Something everyone here needs to see." The event organizer, sensing the gravity of the situation, quickly prepared the projector that would later be used to display messages from sponsors. The shaky image that appeared on the white wall beside the altar left everyone in a state of shock. It was Richard, 5 years younger, sitting by a waterfall near Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Beside him, a young woman with curly hair smiled radiantly. They shared a bottle of wine and knowing smiles. "Bridget, I promise we'll be together forever," Richard said in the video, looking intensely at the young woman. "Tomorrow, when I get back from Chicago with everything resolved, we'll leave this place and start a new life away from all this." The date in the lower corner of the video indicated July 14, 2020, exactly the day before Richard's mysterious disappearance for almost a month, an event that had always been a taboo subject among his acquaintances. Patricia, now visibly shaken, turned to one of the corners of the hall. where a young woman was trying to discreetly leave. It was Bridget Anderson, 30 years old, a professional photographer hired to document the event. Her pale face confirmed what everyone was beginning to suspect. You knew she would be here today?" Patricia asked Richard, her voice almost inaudible. Before Richard could answer, a child of approximately 4 years ran down the aisle and grabbed onto Bridget's legs. The little girl had the same penetrating eyes as Richard, a detail that did not go unnoticed by the guests. Eleanor walked slowly until she stood beside Richard and placed a crumpled letter in his hands. "You wrote this 3 months ago after drinking too much during our last celebration of your birthday. You dropped it from your pocket when you went to sleep in the guest room." Richard immediately recognized the paper where he had poured out his anxieties. In it, he admitted he was getting married only to save the family business, while his heart belonged to someone else, someone he believed had moved on with her life after he failed to appear on the day they planned to run away together. "What you don't know, my son," continued Eleanor, "is that you didn't need to make this sacrifice. I invested all my savings and my parents' small inheritance in your company. Everything is settled. The document is with your lawyer, waiting only for your signature." The guests watched the scene as if witnessing the final chapter of a soap opera. No one dared to interrupt or leave. Among the other couples who would participate in the group ceremony, one of them, Marcus and Julia, exchanged meaningful glances. Julia took a deep breath and stepped forward. I think we shouldn't get married today either, Marcus," she said with a trembling voice. "We're doing this to please our parents, not because we really want to." Marcus, visibly relieved, nodded and held her hand in solidarity. Patricia's grandmother, Constance, an elegant 82-year-old woman, rose with difficulty from her chair in the front row. "Patricia, my granddaughter, don't repeat my mistakes," she said with the wisdom of her years. "I lived 52 years beside a man I chose out of convenience, not love. They were 52 years of a lukewarm life, without passion, without truth." Patricia, who until then seemed paralyzed by shock, finally found her voice. Surprisingly, there was no anger in her words, only a deep sadness and perhaps a touch of relief. I have something to confess too," she said, looking directly at her father. "I love someone else. I tried to convince myself it would pass, that I could learn to love Richard over time, but..." Her gaze drifted to one of the waiters serving. At the party, a simple young man named Gabriel, who watched her with a mixture of surprise and hope. Richard, still dazed, fixed his gaze on Bridget and the child who now hid timidly behind the photographer's legs. "Is she?" he stammered, unable to complete the question. "Your daughter," Bridget completed, with tears in her eyes. "Aurora is 4 years old. She was born 7 months after that day at the waterfall." It was Aurora who, without understanding the gravity of the moment, resolved the impasse. Letting go of her mother, she ran to Richard and handed him a small flash drive with a butterfly keychain. "Here, mister, I switched by accident with Grandma Eleanor, sorry." The innocent gesture brought tears to everyone's eyes. Eleanor, with the serenity of someone who had accomplished her mission, approached Richard and Bridget. "When I was 20, she began, her voice now soft, "I met a man with whom I fell madly in love, but I let family pressures and social conventions keep me from him. I married another man, a good man, but one I never loved as I should have. I lived a life of silent regrets, of endless what-ifs. I don't want that for you, my son." Alfred. Vanderton, after the initial shock, seemed to have calmed down. He approached his daughter and hugged her. "Is it true what you said about this young man?" he asked, discreetly pointing to Gabriel. Patricia nodded, fearful of her father's reaction. To her surprise, he smiled slightly. "Your mother would be proud of your courage," he said simply. "She also defied her parents to be with me, you know. I was just a construction worker when we met." Judge Paul, who had been watching everything with growing understanding, cleared his throat again. "Well, it seems we have some adjustments to make to this ceremony. Miss Bridget, Mr. Richard, would you like to speak privately?" Dear listener, if you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the podcast. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now back to our story. Bridget and Richard moved to a corner of the hall, Aurora between them. The little girl, oblivious to the adult drama, was happily playing with Richard's tie. "Why did you never contact me?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "I did," Bridget replied, years of hurt contained in her voice. "For weeks I tried to find you. I called your cell phone dozens of times, went to your company, your house. No one could tell me where you were. Then, when I finally managed to speak with your secretary, she told me you had traveled abroad on business and didn't want to be disturbed. I sent emails, messages, I never got a response." Richard's expression was one of genuine confusion. "I never received any of that. I never knew you tried to contact me." At that moment, an elderly man approached timidly. It was Sebastian, the former security guard at the Carter family business, now retired. "Excuse me, Mr. Richard," he said, visibly embarrassed. "Your father gave me strict orders to bar that young lady," he pointed to Bridget, "and not to deliver any correspondence from her. He said it was for your own good, that she only wanted to take advantage of your position." The revelation hit Richard like a punch. His father, always controlling, had manipulated his life once again. Even now, residing in Portugal with his new wife, the man had managed to influence his destiny from a distance. "Where were you that month, Richard?" asked Bridget, while Aurora curiously explored the pockets of Richard's suit jacket. "My father arranged everything. He said we urgently needed to evaluate a property in Colombia for a possible international expansion. When we got there, we discovered that the land was isolated, without communication. He deliberately kept me incommunicado, saying it was better that way to clear my mind. Then when we returned, he showed me photos of you with another man, saying you had moved on quickly." "Photos of me with another man?" Bridget was perplexed. "They were photos of you with your twin brother, Andrew, weren't they?" intervened Eleanor, who had discreetly approached. "I always suspected." Bridget nodded, stunned. "Andrew came to visit me when he realized I was depressed because of your absence. We went out a few times to help distract me." The mood in the hall was beginning to change. What had begun as a scandal was gradually transforming into a story of redemption and second chances. The other four couples, after brief deliberation with the judge, decided to proceed with the ceremony, while Richard, Bridget, and Patricia resolved their situations. Patricia and Gabriel were talking in a corner, under the watchful but no longer disapproving gaze of Alfred Vanderton. Richard noticed that for the first time since he'd met her, Patricia was smiling with genuine happiness. "How did you start photographing weddings?" Richard asked Bridget, trying to fill in the 5 years of absence. "It was out of necessity at first," she replied. "When I discovered I was pregnant and realized you really weren't coming back, I needed to find a way to support us. I started photographing birthday parties for my friends' children, then baptisms, graduations, and eventually weddings. I have my own studio now in Evanston." Richard felt a mixture of pride and regret. Pride for Bridget's strength and determination. A regret for not having been there to support her, to see Aurora's first steps, her first words. Aurora, who had explored every inch of Richard's suit jacket, was now holding something in her small hands, a velvet box that he had intended to give to Patricia after the ceremony, containing an emerald necklace. "Is this for me?" asked the little girl, her eyes shining. Richard smiled, kneeling to be at her level. "It's for your mother," he answered softly. "A gift for being so brave and wonderful all these years." Eleanor watched the scene with tears in her eyes. Her intervention, which initially seemed cruel and untimely, now revealed itself as a final act of love. In her last months of life, she had managed to correct an injustice that had affected so many lives. The judge, after finishing the ceremony with the remaining 4 couples, approached Richard and Bridget again. "And what about you two? Any decision?" he asked kindly. Richard looked at Bridget and then at Aurora. It had been only 5 years since they were a young couple in love by the waterfall, but it seemed like lifetimes of experiences separated them. "I think we need time," Bridget answered sensibly. "There's a lot to talk about, a lot to get to know. But could we start with coffee tomorrow?" suggested Richard, his eyes reflecting hope. "At the coffee tree, like old times?" Bridget smiled, a smile that Richard remembered so well. "I think that would be a good start." Meanwhile, on the other side of the hall, guests were beginning to disperse. The event that should have been a group wedding had transformed into something much more significant, a lesson about truth, courage, and second chances. Eleanor, suddenly feeling tired, sat down in a nearby chair. Richard and Bridget immediately went to her side. "You should have told me about your health," Richard gently reproached, holding the hand of the woman who had raised him. "And have you around me with sad puppy dog eyes?" joked Eleanor, but her smile couldn't hide the weariness in her eyes. "I wanted to resolve this first. I wanted to make sure you would have a chance at true happiness." Aurora, sensing the emotional climate, timidly approached and placed her small hand over Eleanor's. "Are you a grandma too?" she asked innocently. Eleanor felt her heart expand, with a love she didn't know was possible to feel at first sight. "If your mother and father allow it, I would love to be your grandma too, for the days I have left." Bridget, with tears in her eyes, nodded. "It would be an honor, Eleanor. Aurora has only my mother as a grandmother. It would be wonderful for her to have you too." The hall, which hours earlier had vibrated with expectations and prenuptial nervousness, now had an almost intimate atmosphere. Staff members were discreetly beginning to dismantle the decoration, respecting the small groups that were still conversing. Patricia approached the trio, Gabriel a few steps behind. Her wedding dress, an exclusive model that had cost a small fortune, now seemed merely an out-of-place outfit for the moment. "Richard, she began, uncertain. "You don't need to say anything, Patricia," he interrupted gently. "I think we both know we were doing this for the wrong reasons. Still, I feel I owe you an apology. And you too, Bridget. I didn't know about any of this." Bridget smiled understandingly. "No one knew. We were all trapped in incomplete stories." Gabriel, who had respectfully kept his distance, finally approached. "Mr. Richard, I wanted you to know that my feelings for Miss Patricia have always been sincere. I never intended to cause problems." Richard studied the young man before him. Gabriel must have been around 25, but his eyes showed a maturity beyond his years. "How long have you?" he asked, unable to complete the sentence. "We met 8 months ago when I started working at events for her father's company," replied Gabriel. "But only recently did we realize what we felt for each other." Patricia lowered her eyes, blushing slightly. "I tried to fight it. I knew my father's expectations, the agreement between our families." Alfred Vanderton, who had been observing the scene from a distance, finally approached. "Daughter, I think it's time for us to go," he said, surprisingly calm. Then, turning to Richard, he added, "As for our business agreement, we can discuss new terms on Monday, without personal conditions attached." Richard nodded, grateful for the man's reasonable attitude. "Thank you, Mr. Vanderton, and I really apologize for this whole situation." "Don't worry," replied the businessman with a resigned sigh. "Apparently, I had more influence from my mother than I imagined. It's about time to break this cycle of marriages of convenience in our family." While the group was talking, Aurora had moved a few steps away, attracted by a particularly colorful flower arrangement. As she tried to reach a purple orchid, she lost her balance and almost knocked over the vase. Eleanor, with surprising agility for someone in her condition, quickly rose and caught the little girl before she fell. The sudden effort, however, was too much for her weakened body. Eleanor staggered, suddenly pale, and would have fallen if Richard hadn't supported her. "Eleanor!" he exclaimed, alarmed. "I'm fine, just need to rest a bit," she reassured him, but her breathing was visibly altered. Bridget quickly took Aurora in her arms, while Richard helped Eleanor sit down again. "We're taking you to the hospital," he said, already reaching for his cell phone to call an ambulance. "No, my son," Eleanor replied firmly. "No hospitals today. I've spent enough time in them in recent weeks. I just want to go home to my bed with my books." Richard hesitated, torn between respecting Eleanor's wish and concern for her health. "At least let me call your doctor to examine you at home," he negotiated. Eleanor smiled weakly and nodded. "That I can accept. But first," she made a gesture, indicating she wanted to stand up. With Richard's help, she managed to get on her feet again and looked around at the people who still remained in the hall. "I would like to say a few words, if you don't mind." The small group that remained, including the judge, some hotel staff, Patricia and her family, and the few guests who had not yet departed, gathered around her. "Perhaps you see me as a meddlesome old woman who ruined a wedding," she began, her voice weak but clear. "And perhaps I am. But if there's one thing I've learned in my years of life, it's that the truth, however painful it may be at the moment, always causes less suffering in the long run than a comfortable lie." She paused, breathing with some difficulty before continuing. "I lived many years with silent regrets, with choices I didn't have the courage to make. I don't wish that on anyone, especially those I love. True love doesn't bind, doesn't limit, doesn't demand sacrifices that destroy the soul. True love liberates." Aurora, without fully understanding the meaning of those words, but sensing their importance, freed herself from her mother's arms and approached Eleanor. With the innocence of childhood, she took the woman's hand and squeezed it lightly. "You don't seem like a meddlesome lady at all," said the little girl, making everyone smile. "How you seem like a fairy godmother." Eleanor laughed, a laugh that turned into a slight cough. "Well, that's a much nicer version, isn't it?" "I like it," she replied, caressing the girl's hair. Richard observed the interaction between his newly discovered daughter and the woman who had been his greatest influence in life. There was something profoundly significant in that meeting of generations, in that silent transfer of wisdom. "I think it's time for us to go," he said softly, noticing the increasingly evident fatigue on Eleanor's face. The group began to disperse, exchanging goodbyes and promises of future contact. Patricia, now without her veil and with a coat over her wedding dress, approached Richard one last time. "Despite everything, I wish you much happiness," she said. "Sincerely." "All three of you," she added, looking at Bridget and Aurora. "Likewise, Patricia. You deserve someone who loves you for who you are, not for what your family represents." Gabriel, who had been waiting a few steps behind, stepped forward and timidly offered his arm to Patricia. She accepted with a smile, and together they headed for the exit, followed by a thoughtful Alfred Vanderton. Eleanor, supported by Richard, observed the couple walking away. "See? Even your almost father-in-law has a heart under that tough businessman facade." Richard smiled. "You always see the best in people, don't you, Eleanor?" "Not always," she replied with a sigh. "It took me too long to see what your father really was. I should have protected you better from him." "Hey, none of that," Richard gently reprimanded. "You were the best thing that happened in my life. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you." Bridget, who was organizing the few things she had brought for the event, approached with Aurora. "We're ready to go," she announced. Then, hesitantly, she added, "Eleanor, if you'd like, we can drop you off at home first." Eleanor looked at the young woman with gratitude. "That would be very kind, my dear, but I don't want to interfere with your reunion. I have my driver waiting." "It's no trouble at all," insisted Bridget. "And I think Aurora wouldn't forgive me if she couldn't see fairy godmother Grandma's house," the little girl confirmed with an enthusiastic nod, making everyone laugh again. "In that case, I accept the invitation," Eleanor surrendered. "But with one condition, that we have tea together when we arrive. I have cinnamon cookies that are especially delicious with stories." And so, the unlikely group left the hall where a wedding that shouldn't have happened gave way to a family reunion that should never have been postponed. As they walked to the parking lot, Eleanor silently thanked fate for the opportunity to correct an old mistake and provide a new chance for those she loved. The Chicago sky, usually obscured by pollution, showed a rare clear blue tone that afternoon. A good omen, thought Eleanor, for the new beginnings that were announcing themselves. Dear listener, if you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the podcast. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now back to our story. 3 weeks had passed since the interrupted wedding. It was a sunny Wednesday when Richard parked his car in front of Eleanor's small apartment in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. In the last few weeks, he had divided his time between daily visits to Eleanor, meetings to reorganize the family business now that the marriage to Patricia would not take place, and meetings with Bridget and Aurora in Evanston. The doorman, already familiar with his constant presence, nodded in recognition as Richard entered the well-maintained old building. In the elevator, He adjusted the bouquet of daisies he carried, Eleanor's favorite flowers. Upon reaching the fourth floor, he noticed something different. The door to apartment 42 was ajar, and soft voices came from inside. He immediately recognized Bridget's musical timbre and Aurora's animated chatter. He felt his heart race pleasantly, as it always did when he encountered them unexpectedly. "Permission to enter?" he asked, knocking lightly on the already open door. "Daddy!" exclaimed Aurora, running to hug him. In the last few weeks, the little girl had adapted surprisingly quickly to Richard's presence in her life, adopting the term "daddy" with a naturalness that moved him every time. Bridget appeared in the hallway, wearing a floral apron that Richard recognized as belonging to Eleanor. "We're making cinnamon cookies," she explained with a smile. "Eleanor is having a good day today." Richard felt momentary relief. Eleanor's good days were becoming increasingly rare. He followed Bridget to the kitchen, where he found his guardian sitting at the table supervising the cookie making. Despite her pallor and evident weight loss, her eyes maintained the lively sparkle of always. "Ah, there you are," exclaimed Eleanor upon seeing him. "Just in time to try the batch that just came out." "I made this one," announced Aurora proudly, pointing to a slightly crooked cookie shaped like what appeared to be a cat. "It's the most beautiful of all," Richard praised, dramatically biting into the cookie, "and the tastiest too." The domestic scene warmed his heart. It was almost as if they were a normal family, gathered for an afternoon of baking. Almost, if not for the ghost of limited time hovering over them. "How was the meeting with Vanderton?" asked Eleanor, while Bridget returned to the oven to check the new batch. Richard sat at the table, placing the bouquet next to the plate of cookies. Surprisingly well, he proposed a business partnership without personal conditions attached. As he said that day, Vanderton Construction is interested in diversifying its investments, and our textile area is a good complement for the technical fabrics they use in construction. "And Patricia?" asked Eleanor, always concerned about everyone involved in the situation. "She's fine. From what I've heard, she and Gabriel are getting to know each other better without rushing." Her father apparently gave his blessing, although he demanded that Gabriel complete his civil engineering course. Eleanor smiled, satisfied. "See? Everything falls into place when we make room for the truth." Aurora, who had moved away to draw, at the side table returned with a colorful sheet of paper. "Look, Grandma Eleanor, I drew you," she said, extending the drawing. Eleanor took the paper with slightly trembling hands. In the childish drawing, a white-haired figure was surrounded by colorful hearts and what appeared to be books. "It's you with your magic books," Aurora explained seriously. "Mommy said you have books that tell stories from all over the world." "I do indeed," confirmed Eleanor, visibly moved. "Thank you, dear. I'll keep it forever." The afternoon passed peacefully between cookies, tea, and stories. Eleanor, despite her evident fatigue, insisted on telling Aurora some of the American folk tales she used to teach in her literature classes. When the sun began to set, Bridget gently suggested it was time to let Eleanor rest. Aurora initially protested, but upon seeing the heavy eyes of Grandma, agreed to leave, not without first demanding the promise that they would return the next day. "Of course we'll return," assured Bridget, helping her daughter put on a light jacket. "If Eleanor is up to it, I'm always up for you," replied Eleanor, already settled in her favorite armchair in the living room. While Bridget and Aurora prepared to leave, Richard remained a moment longer with Eleanor. "You look tired," he observed with concern. "Would you like me to call Dr. Martin?" Eleanor made a dismissive gesture with her hand. "Nothing a good sleep won't fix. Besides, he was here yesterday and brought no news. What is happening is exactly what we expected." Richard swallowed hard, still unable to fully accept the inevitable. "Still, perhaps we should consider that experimental treatment he mentioned." "Richard," interrupted Eleanor softly but firmly, "we've already talked about this. I don't want to spend my last days in a hospital, connected to machines, suffering from side effects. I want quality, not quantity." He nodded, respecting her decision, although his heart rebelled against the idea of losing her. "I just want more time with you," he admitted, holding her hand between his. "And you will have it," she assured him with a smile. Every moment is precious, my dear. And look at how many wonderful moments we've already had in these last few weeks. Bridget reappeared in the doorway, Aurora already waiting in the hallway. We're going, Eleanor. Rest well. Are you coming with us? She asked Richard. He hesitated, looking at Eleanor. Go, encouraged the woman. Aurora was talking all day about that new animated movie. The three of you should go to the cinema tonight. Are you sure I can stay if you prefer? Absolutely sure. Besides, Teresa is coming to keep me company soon. She referred to the nurse who spent nights with her. Go enjoy your family. The word family triggered a wave of emotions in Richard. That's what they were becoming gradually, day by day. Him, Bridget, and Aurora. A family. All right then, but I'll be back early tomorrow. I'll be waiting with more cookies, promised Eleanor, settling more comfortably in the armchair. Richard said goodbye with a kiss on the forehead of the woman who had been more of a mother to him than his biological mother had ever been. We'll be here when you wake up. Eleanor smiled, her eyes already closing from tiredness. I know, my son, I know. Leaving the room with Bridget and Aurora, Richard couldn't deny the feeling that something fundamental had changed, as if Eleanor, having fulfilled her self-imposed mission, was finally allowing herself to rest. Teresa, who was waiting discreetly in the hallway, confirmed this impression. She used every ounce of her strength today, commented the nurse in a low voice. But it was worth it, wasn't it? I've never seen her so happy. Richard just nodded. The words stuck in his throat. That night, after putting Aurora to bed in the guest room and Bridget's parents retiring to a nearby hotel, Richard and Bridget sat on the small balcony of the apartment, contemplating the city lights. They still wore their wedding clothes, although Bridget had removed the veil and Richard had loosened his tie. So, Mrs. Carter, he said softly, holding her hand, the newly placed ring shining under the dim light. How do you feel? Bridget smiled, leaning against his shoulder. Like I'm finally where I was always meant to be, she replied simply. And you? Complete, he answered after a moment of reflection. Scared at the idea of losing Eleanor soon, but complete. Bridget nodded, perfectly understanding the contradictory mixture of emotions. She gave us an invaluable gift, No, not just by bringing us together, but by teaching us what really matters. The truth, completed Richard. Even when it hurts, even when it seems untimely, the truth is always the way. They remained in silence for a long moment, absorbing the quietness of the night and the magnitude of the day they had lived. It wasn't how they had imagined their wedding years ago, when they dreamed together by the waterfall, but somehow it seemed more meaningful, deeper. What do you think about moving here? Richard suddenly asked. After. This place has so many memories, so much of her in every corner. It would be a way to keep her close to Aurora. Bridget considered, for a moment before answering. I think it would be perfect, she finally said. Eleanor would love to know we would continue here, filling the walls with new memories, new laughter. Then it's decided, concluded Richard, our first decision as an officially married couple. Bridget smiled, leaning in for a gentle kiss. That promised much more when they were truly alone in their own home. The first of many, she promised. The phone rang inside the apartment, interrupting the moment. Richard immediately stood up, a chill in his stomach, anticipating bad news. It was Teresa. Mr. Richard, I think you should come. She's asking for you. Richard and Bridget exchanged concerned looks before hurrying to Eleanor's room. They found her awake, seeming curiously alert, despite her accentuated pallor. Ah, there you are, she said with a weak smile. I was worried you had already gone. We would never leave without saying goodbye, assured Richard, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed and holding Eleanor's hand. Of course not, confirmed Bridget, occupying the other side. We were just talking on the balcony. The view of the city is beautiful from here. Eleanor smiled weakly. I've always loved that view, especially at dawn when the sun rises behind. The buildings. It seems the entire city awakens together. There was a moment of comfortable silence, as if none of the three wanted to break the enchantment of that shared instant. It was a beautiful wedding, commented Eleanor finally. So simple and at the same time so meaningful, exactly as it should be. Thanks to you, replied Richard, gently squeezing her hand. You thought of every detail. And Aurora as a flower girl, added Bridget. I've never seen her so proud. Eleanor smiled at the thought of her granddaughter. She was born for the spotlight, that girl. She has the posture of a queen. Teresa, who had remained discreetly in the corner of the room, approached with a glass of water and Eleanor's nightly medications. It's time for your medicine, ma'am, she informed gently. Eleanor made a small grimace, but obediently accepted the pills. Richard, open the drawer of the nightstand, please, she asked after taking the medication. There's a small package in there. Richard obeyed, finding a small box wrapped in silver paper with a blue ribbon. What is this? He asked, handing the package to Eleanor. A small wedding gift, she replied, returning the box to Richard. For both of you. Richard looked at Bridget, who nodded encouragingly. Carefully, he unwrapped the gift, revealing a carved wooden box. Inside, resting on blue velvet, was a delicate silver cameo. It was my grandmother's, explained Eleanor. It passed to my mother, then to me. As I had no biological children, I would like it to stay with you, with Aurora, eventually. Bridget took the cameo with reverence, opening it to reveal a tiny internal compartment where there was a miniature portrait of a young woman. My grandmother at 18, explained Eleanor. They say I have her eyes. It's true, agreed Richard, observing the resemblance. Aurora has those same eyes. Eleanor smiled, clearly pleased with the connection across generations. There's a legend in my family, and she began, her voice now lower, forcing Richard and Bridget to lean in to hear her. They say this cameo originally belonged to a countess who brought it to America during the early 1800s. She had fallen in love with a simple sailor, but her family opposed the relationship. Forced to marry a nobleman, she gave the cameo to her true love as a symbol of her heart, which would always belong to him. Richard and Bridget exchanged emotional looks while Eleanor continued the story. Years later, when she was already a widow, she reunited with her sailor, who had kept the cameo all that time. Finally free, they could be together. Since then, the cameo has passed from generation to generation, always with the promise that it holds the power to reunite true loves, no matter how much time or what obstacles separate them. It's a beautiful story, commented Bridget, moved. And true, at least for us, isn't it? Completed Richard, looking at Bridget with love. Eleanor observed the couple with evident satisfaction. The cameo has fulfilled its destiny once more, she said softly. Now it belongs to you. Use it wisely, pass it on when the time comes. Bridget held Eleanor's hand, words of gratitude stuck in her throat. We will honor it and the story it carries, she finally promised. Eleanor nodded, her eyes beginning to droop under the effect of the medication. I know you will. Now, I think I need to rest a bit. It was a perfect day, but quite tiring for this old lady. Richard leaned in to kiss Eleanor's forehead. Rest well. We'll be here if you need anything. I know, my son. I know. When they left the room, leaving Teresa to make Eleanor more comfortable, Richard and Bridget exchanged concerned looks. She seems so fragile, whispered Bridget. But so at peace, replied Richard, hugging his wife around the shoulders as they walked to the living room. That night, the newlywed couple remained in the apartment, sleeping on the sofa bed in the living room close enough to hear any call. Aurora slept peacefully in the guest room, exhausted after a day of intense emotions. Dawn arrived gently, illuminating the city exactly as Eleanor had described, a spectacle of light being born behind the buildings, granting renewed life to the metropolis. Teresa appeared in the living room doorway, her face serene but solemn. She's calling for you, she said simply. Richard and Bridget exchanged meaningful looks before getting up. Silently, they agreed not to wake Aurora yet. Eleanor was sitting, in her bed, supported by pillows, looking curiously more alert than the night before. A book of poetry was open on her lap. Good morning, my dears, she greeted with a smile. I hope I didn't interrupt your sleep. Not at all, assured Bridget, approaching to kiss the woman's cheek. How do you feel? Strangely light, replied Eleanor, her gaze distant for a moment. As if I were floating. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, noticing that the open book showed a poem by Robert Frost. "The road not taken," he commented, recognizing the text. "Your favorite." Eleanor smiled, gently caressing the page. "Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by," she recited, her voice firmer as she pronounced the beloved words. "I've always identified with this poem, the idea that you have to make difficult choices to find your true path, that sometimes taking the less obvious road makes all the difference." Richard nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. "Eleanor, is there anything we can do for you?" asked Bridget gently. The elderly woman seemed to consider the question for a moment. "I would like to see the sunrise from the balcony," she said finally. "One last time." The words "last time" hung heavily in the air, but no one contested them. There was a silent acceptance that the moment was near. "Of course," agreed Richard, already moving to help her up. With the help of Richard and Teresa, Eleanor was carefully transferred to her wheelchair and taken to the balcony. Bridget adjusted a blanket over the woman's legs, protecting her from the cool morning air. "Perfect," sighed Eleanor when she was positioned facing the horizon, where the sun continued its majestic ascent. "Absolutely perfect." For a few minutes, the three remained in silence, absorbing the beauty of the morning spectacle. The city gradually came to life around them, lights turning on in apartments, car engines starting, the distant hum of the L train beginning its operations. "Did you know that when I bought this apartment 30 years ago, everyone told me it was foolish?" commented Eleanor suddenly. "A single teacher investing all her savings in such an expensive property, just for the view, but I always knew it would be worth it. Some things can't be measured in money, can they?" "Certainly not," agreed Richard, holding her hand. "Like love," added Bridget softly. Eleanor smiled, squeezing Richard's hand. "Exactly like love. Impossible to measure, impossible to contain, only possible to feel." A movement at the balcony door attracted the attention of the three. Aurora was there, rubbing her eyes sleepily, still in her unicorn pajamas. "Grandma Eleanor," called the little girl, her voice small and confused. "Come here, my love," invited Eleanor, opening her arms. Aurora ran into the embrace, naturally settling herself in the elderly woman's lap. "Are you watching the sunrise?" asked the girl, looking at the colorful horizon. "Yes, little one, it's beautiful, isn't it?" Aurora nodded solemnly. "It's the most beautiful thing after you, Grandma." Eleanor laughed, a genuinely happy sound that surprised everyone, including herself. "You're a flatterer, you know that? Just like your father when he was your age." Richard smiled, recalling how Eleanor always lovingly accused him of trying to sweet-talk her with compliments when he wanted to stay up past his bedtime. "Some talents are hereditary, it seems," he joked. "And some personality traits, too," agreed Eleanor, carefully observing the similarities between father and daughter. "Aurora has your determination, Richard, and Bridget's creativity. It's a powerful combination." "Powerful and sometimes exhausting," completed Bridget with a loving smile. Aurora, oblivious to the conversation about her, was completely absorbed in the spectacle of the dawn. "Look, Grandma, the sun is making the glass building look like gold." Eleanor followed the little girl's pointed finger, observing how the sun rays reflected on the mirrored facade of a nearby commercial building, creating a truly golden effect. "You have an artist's eyes, Aurora," she praised. "You see beauty where others only see the ordinary." The girl smiled, proud of the compliment. "The little teacher at my school said I draw better than everyone in my class." "Teacher, Aurora," Bridget automatically corrected. "Not little teacher." Eleanor laughed again. "Leave her be, Bridget. I remember another little girl who used to call her teacher Mrs. Giant because she was very tall." It was Bridget's turn to blush, while Richard raised his eyebrows, surprised. "That I didn't know," he commented, amused. "Oh, I have many stories about all my former students," assured Eleanor, with a mischievous sparkle in her eyes. "Especially about those who became family." Aurora, bored with the adults' conversation, had turned her attention to the poetry book in Eleanor's lap. "What's written here, Grandma?" she asked, pointing to the poem. "It's a poem about choices. Dear, about adventures and discoveries. Can you read it to me? Eleanor smiled, adjusting the glasses that Teresa had providentially brought. Of course I can. With a clear voice, although slightly trembling, Eleanor began to recite the entire poem, her perfect cadence capturing the essence of Frost's words. Aurora listened with surprising attention for a child her age, occasionally asking questions about words she didn't understand. When she finished, a reverent silence hovered over the small group. The sun had completed its ascent, bathing the balcony in a warm golden light. I liked the part about the roads being different, declared Aurora finally, but why couldn't he take both? Eleanor considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Because, dear, sometimes in life we have to make choices that lead us in different directions, and we can only follow one path at a time. The important thing is to choose the path that feels right for us, even if it's not the easy one. Aurora nodded, her small face serious as she processed the information. Like when I had to choose between ballet and soccer, and I picked soccer even though all my friends were in ballet. Exactly like that, confirmed Eleanor, impressed with the girl's understanding. Bridget watched the interaction with a heavy heart, aware of the precious moment she was witnessing. The transfer of wisdom between generations, a conversation that Aurora would probably not remember in detail as an adult, but whose lessons would remain imprinted on her soul. I think we can go back inside now, suggested Eleanor after a few more moments of silent contemplation. I'm starting to feel a bit cold. Richard immediately adjusted the blanket over her legs, preparing to push the wheelchair back into the apartment. Perhaps you'd like to rest a bit, he suggested, concerned about the growing pallor on Eleanor's face. Later, perhaps, she replied. Now I would like to have a proper breakfast with my family. I imagine Teresa could prepare those pancakes that Aurora likes so much. Teresa, who had remained discreetly apart during the family conversation, stepped forward with a smile. Of course, Miss Eleanor, with chocolate chips for Aurora. And with strawberries for the adults, completed Eleanor, knowing everyone's preferences well. Back in the living room, now illuminated by the morning light, Eleanor asked to be transferred to her favorite armchair. From there, she could observe Aurora, who was now animatedly drawing in a sketchbook, Richard and Bridget, who were talking in low voices in the kitchen while helping Teresa with breakfast, and the apartment in general, the space that had been her home for so many years, and that would soon house the new family she had helped to reunite. There was a sense of completeness in the air, as if a cycle was perfectly closing. Eleanor took a deep breath, allowing herself to absorb every detail, every sound, every fragment of that perfect moment. When breakfast was served on the coffee table in the living room, a special concession to Eleanor's condition, the conversation flowed naturally between light topics and future plans. Aurora talked about her school in Evanston and how excited she was to possibly study in Chicago. Bridget commented on the possibility of opening a small photography studio in the neighborhood. Richard mentioned ideas to expand the textile company into sustainable materials. Eleanor observed everything with a serene smile, occasionally contributing a suggestion or a comment, but mainly just absorbing the family dynamics unfolding before her. Grandma, what do you think about me painting my room pink with golden stars? On the ceiling, Aurora suddenly asked. Your room? Repeated Eleanor, momentarily confused. Yes, here, explained the girl enthusiastically. Daddy said we're going to live in your house after you... She frowned, searching for the right words. After you go to live with the angels. An uncomfortable silence fell over the adults. Richard and Bridget exchanged concerned looks, uncertain about how to deal with the childish frankness. But Eleanor just smiled without any trace of discomfort. I think golden stars on the ceiling would be perfect, Aurora, she answered softly. And maybe a crescent moon in one corner. What do you think? The girl's eyes lit up. Yes. And we can paint little clouds too, right, Daddy? Richard, relieved by Eleanor's calm response, smiled at his daughter. Of course, Princess. We can decorate your room exactly as you want. As long as it's not too extravagant, added Bridget, giving her daughter a meaningful look as she had a tendency toward grandiose ideas. What's extravagant? Asked Aurora, struggling with the new word. It means exaggerated, too flashy, explained Eleanor. Your mother is worried that you want to transform the room into a complete amusement park. Aurora laughed, as if the idea were absurd. No, Grandma, I just want stars, moon, clouds, and maybe, she made a dramatic pause, a really big unicorn on the wall. There's the extravagance, murmured Bridget to Richard, who smiled in response. The morning advanced peacefully. Around 10 o'clock, Bridget's parents arrived to take Aurora for a promised trip to the zoo, giving Richard and Bridget some time, alone with Eleanor. When they were alone, Eleanor asked to see the cameo she had gifted to the couple again. There's something I didn't tell you yesterday, she said, when Bridget brought the delicate jewel. Something about the cameo that only the current guardian should know. Richard and Bridget exchanged curious looks, moving closer to hear the secret. If you press here, Eleanor demonstrated, gently pressing a small, almost imperceptible protuberance on the side of the cameo, a secret compartment opens. To the couple's surprise, a tiny hidden compartment indeed opened at the base of the cameo, revealing a folded piece of paper, yellowed by time. What is this? Asked Richard, fascinated. The original letter from the Countess to her sailor, replied Eleanor. Or at least, that's what the family tradition says. I never had the courage to open it, to avoid damaging the paper. But it's there, passing from generation to generation, keeping the secret of a love that overcame all obstacles. Bridget touched the paper reverently, without daring to unfold it. It's an enormous responsibility, she commented, aware of the historical and sentimental value of the object. One that I know you will honor, assured Eleanor. One day when Aurora is an adult and hopefully has found true love, you will pass the cameo to her, along with its history and its secrets. So it shall be, promised Richard solemnly. Eleanor smiled, satisfied, and carefully closed the secret compartment. Now there is something else I would like to discuss with you, about the future, about practical arrangements. The conversation that followed was difficult, but necessary. Eleanor, always practical, wanted to ensure that all details were resolved, that there would be no confusion or uncertainty after her departure. Richard and Bridget listened attentively, occasionally asking questions or offering suggestions, but mainly respecting the clearly expressed wishes of Eleanor. When they finished almost an hour later, there was a complete plan for the following days and weeks. Nothing was left unsaid, no doubt remained. I feel lighter now, declared Eleanor, leaning back in her armchair, as if I had deposited a great weight I was carrying. Always efficient, aren't you, Eleanor? Commented Richard affectionately, organizing everything to the last detail. Someone needs to be, she replied with a tired smile, especially when it comes to you two dreamers that you are. Bridget laughed softly. That's why we make such a good team. You keep us grounded while we allow ourselves to dream. And that's how it should be, affirmed Eleanor. Dream, my dears, dream grandly. Just remember to build solid foundations for those dreams. The rest of the day passed peacefully. Eleanor rested a lot, alternating between brief naps in her armchair and light conversations when awake. Late in the afternoon, when Aurora returned from the zoo trip, full of stories about the animals she had seen, Eleanor listened to every word with genuine interest, asking questions and exclaiming at the appropriate moments, despite her evident fatigue. At nightfall, after a light dinner that Eleanor barely touched, she asked to be taken to the balcony again. The city is as beautiful at night as it is at dawn, she commented, observing the thousands of lights that dotted the urban landscape. In a different way, but equally fascinating. Richard, Bridget, and Aurora remained with her, absorbing the view and the moment. The night was exceptionally clear, allowing some stars to be visible even through the light pollution of the metropolis. Look, a shooting star, exclaimed Aurora suddenly, pointing to the sky. Everyone looked in the indicated direction, in time to see a quick trace of light cutting through the firmament. Make a wish, dear, instructed Eleanor softly. Aurora closed, her eyes tightly, her little face concentrated on the important task. When she opened them again, she smiled with satisfaction. Done, now it will come true. What did you wish for? Asked Bridget. You can't tell, Mom, protested Aurora, scandalized. Otherwise it won't come true. Eleanor laughed softly. Your daughter knows the rules. The night advanced and eventually Aurora began to yawn. Bridget took her to prepare for bed, leaving Richard alone with Eleanor on the balcony. "You've created a beautiful family, my son," commented Eleanor after a moment of comfortable silence. "Thanks to you," he replied sincerely. "If it weren't for your courage that day at the wedding—" Eleanor made a gesture dismissing the thanks. "I just did what anyone who loves you would do. The hard part was waiting for the right moment." Richard looked at her with curiosity. "How long did you know? About Aurora, about everything?" Eleanor considered the question for a moment. "I suspected from the beginning that something had happened during your disappearance. You came back different, more closed off, more resigned. It wasn't just a common heartbreak, it was something deeper. But I only became certain when I found your letter and later, the video on the flash drive. And you decided to keep the information until the last possible moment." "It was necessary," she confirmed. "If I had told you earlier, you might have tried to contact Bridget prematurely when emotions were still heated. Or worse, your father might have interfered again. It needed to be at a moment when it would be impossible for anyone to deny the truth, when all those involved were present, when the consequences of a lie would be greater than those of facing reality." Richard nodded, understanding the meticulous strategy. "And you chose the group wedding because you knew it would be a public event." "Exactly. Your father couldn't simply disappear with you again without causing a scandal, nor could the Vanderton family easily cover up the case. Besides, I suspected that Patricia wasn't completely happy with the arrangement either. I needed to give her an honorable way out too." "You calculated every move," observed Richard, impressed. "Like in a chess game." "A match for which I waited almost 5 years," confirmed Eleanor. "Observing, collecting information, waiting for the right moment." Richard held her hand between his, aware of how much effort that wait must have required. "And if you were wrong? If I really loved Patricia, if there was no Aurora?" Eleanor smiled serenely. "Then I would have made a ridiculous scene at your wedding, and you probably would never speak to me again. It was a risk I was willing to take." The sincerity of the response touched Richard deeply. "Thank you," he said simply, unable to elaborate further without his voice failing. Eleanor squeezed his hand in response. "You're welcome, my son. You're welcome." Bridget returned at that moment, announcing that Aurora had finally fallen asleep, after 3 stories and a glass of water. "I think the excitement of the zoo combined with all the events of the last few days finally caught up with her," she commented, sitting next to Richard. "Children have impressive energy," observed Eleanor. "But even little volcanoes eventually quiet down." The 3 remained on the balcony for some time longer, talking softly under the starry sky. When Eleanor finally admitted to being very tired, Richard helped her return to her room, where Teresa waited to assist her with the nighttime routine. "Good night, my dears," Eleanor said goodbye when she was comfortably settled in her bed. "Thank you for another wonderful day." "Good night, Eleanor," replied Bridget, leaning in to kiss the woman's cheek. "Rest well." "We'll be here when you wake up," assured Richard, repeating the words that had become almost a ritual between them. Eleanor smiled, her eyes already closing from fatigue. "I know, my son, I know." As they left the room, leaving Teresa to finalize the nighttime care, Richard and Bridget exchanged concerned looks. "She seems weaker today," commented Bridget in a low voice. Richard nodded, feeling the weight of the reality they were trying to postpone. Teresa said it's natural. There will be good days and more difficult days with a gradual decline. "At least she seems at peace," observed Bridget. "That's a consolation." The following days established a new normalcy. Eleanor alternated between periods of surprising clarity and energy and moments of extreme fatigue. Dr. Martin visited daily, adjusting medications and offering guidance, always with the kindness and patience that characterized him. Richard reorganized his work to be able to spend more time in the apartment, often conducting meetings via video conference from an improvised office in the corner of the living room. Bridget, with the help of her assistant, managed to postpone most of her professional commitments, accepting only jobs that could be done quickly and near the apartment. Aurora, instinctively perceiving the gravity of the situation even without fully understanding it, had become a comforting presence, bringing drawings for Eleanor, telling elaborate stories about her toys, or simply sitting quietly beside Grandma while she rested. It was during one of these peaceful moments, approximately a week after the wedding, that Eleanor made an unexpected request. "I would like to go to the beach," she announced suddenly, interrupting the comfortable silence of the afternoon. Richard, who was working on his laptop nearby, raised his head in surprise. "To the beach? But Eleanor, you—" "I know I'm weak," she interrupted, with a vestige of her old firmness. "But it's something I would really like to do. See the lake one last time." Bridget, who was discreetly photographing Aurora playing with her building blocks, lowered the camera. "Which beach would you like to visit?" she asked, accepting the request without questions. Eleanor smiled, grateful for the understanding. "I've always liked South Haven. It's not far, the access is relatively easy." "South Haven it will be then," agreed Richard, already mentally calculating the necessary preparations. "We can go tomorrow if Dr. Martin approves." To everyone's surprise, the doctor not only approved the idea but encouraged it, suggesting that the change of environment could be beneficial for Eleanor. With his guidance, they organized a small expedition for the following day. An adapted van was rented. Teresa agreed to accompany them with all the necessary medical equipment, and a lakefront apartment was reserved by phone. Aurora, when informed about the outing, was ecstatic. "We're going to build giant sandcastles," she declared, running to gather her buckets and shovels. The next morning, under an impeccably blue sky, the small group set off for the lakeshore. Eleanor, comfortably accommodated in the specially adapted vehicle, observed the landscape through the window with visible satisfaction. "How long has it been since you went to the beach, Eleanor?" asked Bridget, sitting beside her. "Almost 5 years, I believe," she replied thoughtfully. "Since before that month when Richard disappeared. We were planning a trip together to celebrate my birthday, remember, Richard?" Richard, who was driving the van, nodded in the rearview mirror. "I remember. We ended up not going because I started getting involved with the preparations for what would be the international expansion of the company." "The supposed expansion," Eleanor gently corrected. "Another of your father's manipulations." The rest of the journey passed peacefully, with Aurora keeping everyone entertained with her observations and incessant questions about everything she saw through the window. When they finally arrived at South Haven, the sun was high in the sky, bathing the shore in perfect golden light. The rented apartment was in a building by the lake, with a spacious balcony that offered a panoramic view of the water. While Teresa and Bridget organized the accommodations, Richard prepared the special wheelchair they had brought, a model designed for use on sand, with wide wheels that didn't sink so easily. "Ready to see the lake?" he asked Eleanor when everything was prepared. The smile he received in response was answer enough. Carefully, Richard and Teresa helped Eleanor transfer to the special chair. Aurora, already dressed in her swimsuit and sun protection hat, was impatiently hopping around them. Let's go, the water is waiting." "Patience, little one," laughed Bridget, adjusting her daughter's hat. "The beach isn't going to run away." When they finally went down to the beach, the heat of the day was at its peak, but a refreshing breeze blew from the lake. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing the sensation, the smell of the air, the sound of the waves. "Can we go closer to the water?" she asked, opening her eyes again. Richard nodded, carefully pushing the chair through the sand to a point where they could feel the breeze more intensely and see the waves breaking a few meters away. Aurora, unable to contain her excitement, immediately ran to the water's edge, always under Bridget's watchful eye. "Don't go beyond your knees, Aurora," warned Bridget, following her daughter at a safe distance. Eleanor observed the scene with a serene smile. The girl hopping in the shallow waves, laughing at each splash, Bridget vigilant but relaxed, taking occasional photos with the camera she always carried. "They are so beautiful together," she commented to Richard, who had remained at her side, "as if they illuminated the world around them." "I know exactly what you mean," he agreed, observing the two people he loved most in the world. They remained like this for some time, absorbing the tranquility of the moment. Teresa had discreetly moved away, giving them privacy while remaining within reach if needed. "Richard," called Eleanor softly, after a long, contemplative silence. "There's something I need to tell you." The tone of her voice made Richard turn his full attention to her. "What is it, Eleanor?" "I think it's time for you to open that envelope in my study." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. They both knew what those words meant. "Eleanor, no." "It's all right, my dear," she interrupted gently. "Really, I've achieved everything I wanted. I saw you and Bridget married, I met and fell in love with my granddaughter, and now—" She made a gesture encompassing the beach, the lake, the blue sky. "I'm seeing the water again, I'm ready." Richard knelt in the sand beside the chair, holding both of Eleanor's hands between his. "I'm not ready to let you go," he admitted, his voice choked with emotion. Eleanor smiled, a smile so full of peace and acceptance that it almost hurt to look at. "No one is ever really ready, my son. Neither to leave nor to stay. That's why we need to value each moment we have." Aurora, tired of playing in the water, ran back to where they were, her small feet leaving wet impressions in the sand. "Grandma, come see what I found," she exclaimed, extending her hand to show a small, iridescent shell. "It's the most beautiful thing in the world." Eleanor accepted the gift with appropriate reverence. "It is beautiful indeed, Aurora. Thank you for sharing it with me." The girl smiled, proud, before running again to where Bridget was now building the base of a sandcastle. "They'll be fine, you know," commented Eleanor, following Richard's gaze. "You will make them happy." "I'll do my best," he promised. "I know you will. That's why I can go in peace." The rest of the afternoon passed at a tranquil pace. Eleanor insisted on remaining on the beach, refusing to return to the apartment even when Teresa suggested she rest a bit. Instead, she watched Aurora and Richard build an elaborate sandcastle, applauded Bridget's photographic efforts as she captured the perfect late afternoon light, and occasionally closed her eyes to just feel the sun on her face and the breeze in her hair. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in dramatic shades of orange and pink, Eleanor asked to be positioned facing the lake again. "They say there's no sunset more beautiful than the one seen from the water," she commented, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun seemed to slowly sink into the waters. "Now I understand why." Aurora, exhausted from her day of play, sat on Eleanor's lap, resting her head against the elderly woman's chest. "Grandma, why does the sun turn red when it says goodbye?" she asked sleepily. Eleanor smiled, caressing the girl's hair. "It's its way of showing how much it likes us," she answered softly. "It saves its most beautiful colors for the moment of farewell, so that we remember it fondly until it returns the next morning." Aurora considered the explanation for a moment, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "I like that," she finally decided before yawning deeply. Bridget approached to take her sleeping daughter. "Leave her," Eleanor gently requested. "Please, just a little longer." Understanding the meaning behind the request, Bridget nodded and moved a few steps away, giving them space while remaining nearby. The sun continued its descent until only a golden fringe remained visible above the horizon. The sky had taken on deep shades of purple and indigo, with the first stars beginning to appear. "It's time to go back, don't you think?" suggested Richard softly, concerned about the growing chill of the night. Eleanor nodded, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. "Yes, I think it's time." On the return journey to the apartment, Aurora remained asleep in Bridget's arms, while Eleanor thoughtfully observed the city lights that began to shine as it darkened. "It was a perfect day," she commented when they finally arrived. "Thank you for this." "The pleasure was ours," replied Bridget, sincerely. With Teresa's help, Eleanor was accommodated in her bed. She seemed more tired than usual, but strangely serene. "Would you mind staying a while?" she asked when Teresa finished adjusting her pillows. "Just until I fall asleep." Richard and Bridget exchanged meaningful looks before nodding. Aurora had been taken to the guest bed, still deeply asleep after the day of activities. "Of course we'll stay," assured Richard, sitting on the edge of the bed and holding Eleanor's hand. Bridget occupied the other side, also holding the elderly woman's free hand. "The envelope," began Eleanor, her voice weaker. "When we return to Chicago, Don't worry about that now, Richard gently reassured. Rest, you've had a full day. Eleanor smiled, her eyes already closing. It was a perfect day, she repeated, her voice almost a whisper. A perfect ending. In a few minutes, her breathing became regular, indicating she had fallen asleep. Richard and Bridget remained at her side, holding her hands in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Teresa entered silently to check Eleanor's vital signs, nodding reassuringly to the couple before withdrawing again. "Do you think," began Bridget, unable to complete the question. Richard squeezed her hand over Eleanor's. "I don't know. But if it is, at least she had her day at the beach, her sunset over the lake." They remained like this for hours until their own fatigue began to overcome them. Eventually, they agreed to take turns, with Bridget going first to rest while Richard kept vigil. It was during the early morning, when Richard had momentarily yielded to sleep in an armchair near the bed, that Teresa gently woke him. "Mr. Richard," she called in a low voice, "I think it's time to call Mrs. Bridget." Immediately alert, Richard looked at Eleanor. She seemed exactly as when he had left her, peacefully asleep, a slight smile on her lips. But there was something different, a deeper quietness that he instinctively recognized. The following minutes passed in a haze of contained emotions, of arrangements made with respectful dignity. Bridget was called, silent tears running down her face as she held Eleanor's still, warm hand. Dr. Martin was contacted and confirmed he would come in the morning. Aurora mercifully continued sleeping, oblivious to the sadness that permeated the apartment. "She looks so at peace," commented Bridget softly, observing Eleanor's serene face. "She was at peace," confirmed Richard. His voice choked. "She achieved everything she wanted." The first rays of sun were beginning to illuminate the room when they finally allowed themselves to move away from the bed. There were arrangements to make, phone calls to place, but primarily there was an envelope to open. In Eleanor's small, a study exactly where she had indicated, they found the sealed envelope addressed to Richard, Bridget, and Aurora. With trembling hands, Richard opened it, revealing several sheets of paper covered with Eleanor's elegant handwriting. "My dears," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it's because I have finally departed. Don't be too sad for me. I lived a full life, and thanks to you, my last days were the happiest I could wish for. Richard, my heart's son, you were the greatest joy of my life. I watched you grow, stumble, and rise again, always with the certainty so that you would become the extraordinary man you are today. Never doubt your worth or your capacity to love and be loved. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Allow yourself to accept it. Bridget, my dear daughter-in-law, I knew you for such a short time, but it was enough to know that you are exactly who Richard needs by his side. Your strength, your determination, and especially your capacity to forgive are rare qualities. Take care of him as I know you will, but never forget to take care of yourself too. Aurora, my little light, when you grow up enough to understand these words, I want you to know that our brief time together was one of the greatest gifts I received. You have your mother's heart and your father's soul, a powerful combination that will take you far in life. Always be curious, always be kind, and never stop seeing beauty in small things, like that iridescent shell you showed me at the beach. There are practical instructions on the following pages, details about the apartment that is now officially yours, about my savings that should be used for Aurora's education, about books and objects that I would like to be donated or kept. But all of this is secondary. What really matters is what you already know, that true love always finds its way, even if sometimes it needs to take unexpected turns to reach its destination. That honesty, however painful it may be, is always preferable to the most comfortable of lies. And that family is not defined by blood but by the heart. Live fully, love intensely, and when the sun sets, remember to appreciate the colors of farewell, knowing that it will always return the next morning. With all my love, Eleanor. Richard lowered the letter, tears finally running freely down his face. Bridget, equally moved, embraced him in silence, sharing the pain and, simultaneously, the gratitude for having had Eleanor in their lives. In the next room, Aurora was beginning to wake up, her sleepy voice calling for her mother. "I'll get..." "Huh?" said Bridget softly. "We need to tell her in a way she can understand." Richard nodded, wiping away the tears. "I'll go with you." Together, as the family that Eleanor had helped to form, they would face this difficult moment, and all those that would come after, the happy and the sad, the triumphs and the difficulties, always carrying with them the lessons she had taught them. As they walked to the room where Aurora was waiting, Richard thought of the last time he had seen Eleanor smiling in the sunset light on the beach, serene and complete. It was a perfect ending for an extraordinary life, not measured in years or achievements, but in hearts touched and lives transformed. And somewhere he knew Eleanor was watching them with approval, satisfied that her last and greatest lesson had been learned, that the truth, however difficult the path to it may be, is always worth it in the end. The end. Dear listener, if this story touched your heart, don't keep that feeling to yourself. Leave your like, comment on what moved you the most, and if you also believe that truth, however difficult, always liberates. Subscribe to the podcast for more stories that make us reflect on love and life.